We are live on Facebook with Matthew FitzSimmons. Just so everyone knows, you capitalize the S. He's fancy pants. And gosh, I think that she doesn't go by Constance because that is too old fashioned for her. And she is a rock star, hence my Nirvana shirt.
I am digging your t-shirt.
Yeah, it was specially picked for the occasion. Anyway, fantastic. So I loved it. She's one of my favorite characters ever in a thriller. Let's start with the elevator pitch. Give us a quick synopsis. We're going in the elevator. You have to tell us quick what your book is about.
I'm terrible at these. This is why I do not live in Hollywood.
It's a very long elevator.
It's a very long. So the elevator pitch is, what if a woman had to investigate her own murder? Which was the original idea for it, was how could I get someone to have to investigate their own murder? How could someone have to be the detective and the victim in the same story at the same time? And she, it's a near future. It's set in 2040, so about 20 years from now, and we live in this world. Human cloning has come into existence, and there is a company that will provide clone backups, a sort of a life insurance policy against death in the event that something terrible happens to you. They keep a copy of your consciousness and a clone of your body, which they then insert the consciousness. They download the consciousness into your new body, and you carry on with limited fuss. At least that's their sales pitch. Khan is one such person, and when she wakes up from her, when she is revived, she discovers that her original has died, and that she is missing 18 months of memories between the last time that her consciousness was stored and her death. And she basically, it's a journey of self-discovery. This woman has to go and find out all these things that have changed in her life. So there's a little bit of It's a Wonderful Life. What has she missed? What is she, how is she, she in the interim, she's accomplished things that she didn't know how to do. And so there's a lot of self-discovery and also investigating the murder and trying to figure out what happened to her before bad things happened to her too. So that is a terrible elevator pitch, but that is essentially
way better. It's way better for our listeners. Because book jackets, they don't really do the trick for me. I'm lucky because I get sent a lot of books, and I just I'm getting really good at understanding what book I'm going to like in the first place. And I can be really choosy because I'm not paying for all of them, but it's really hard to pick a great book just from that. And I find that with what I'm doing here and having you talk about the book gives so much more depth to not only what the story is about, but how you might be telling the story, because how you're explaining it now. So that is awesome. So let's talk about Khan a little bit. You made her a singer-songwriter who's incredibly talented. Right before her band becomes famous, they get in an accident because her boyfriend insists on driving a car. Now we're a little bit in the future, and drivable cars aren't around. They're all self-driving. So I felt like you had a little connection to making music part of this story. And also there's a lot of references to David Bowie. Is that personal?
Well, I am a huge music fan. When I was young, my high school offered a class in the history of rock and roll. And it's still my favorite class I ever took at any level. And there was a period when I was going to be the next Grail Marcus. I was going to be the next, great rock critic. Not particularly a talented musician, but I really loved music. So this was an opportunity for me to insert some of that. David Bowie, I've always been a fan of, but it was really when the book is set in 2040, and there was a moment when I decided that Khan was going to be younger, and I said, like, why is she a musician? How did she fall in love with music and rock music, in particular, because she grows up in a household that does not really allow that sort of music. And so what got her to that? And I was a high school teacher for a bunch of years, and one of the things that you sort of realize about kids that they will sort of play, and this isn't just kids, this is all of us. We sort of place undue significance in these like coincidences. We don't believe in coincidences. We want everything to have meaning and significance. Sort of what human beings do. We need things to have meant to have been. And so when she's sort of having a hard time as a teenager, she discovers that that she was born on the day that David Bowie died in 2016, that her birthday is the day he died. And so for her, that becomes significant. That means something. And that, as much as anything, I mean, she's already a good singer and is very musically inclined, but that is sort of the, that's the thing this kid latches onto as, this means something. And she becomes this huge David Bowie head. And so that sort of plays through the book.
I loved it. It was fun. And it's, hey, it doesn't, things have meaning that we give meaning to. So, who's to say it doesn't? So another element of the book, and you touched upon it a little bit in your intro that we had just here, was a little bit of a wonderful life. So when we first meet Khan, she's depressed. Her band got in this terrible accident. Some of them have died. Her boyfriend is in a coma, and her body's messed up a little bit. She has a bad knee, but she's not in a good place. And this investigating of her own disappearance is almost like it's a gift to her. It's something for her to focus on. It's bigger than a distraction, but I'm assuming that was intentional to have that journey to out of that depression and into herself a little bit. I don't know that everyone, I have certainly had moments in my life where there's a setback, or that I tried to write a book in my 20s. My first attempt to write a novel that came in my 20s, and I spent a couple of years doing it, and I was waiting tables and sort of doing the starving artist thing, and it wasn't very good. And I sort of fell into a depression. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do next. This was the thing that I wanted. And at 28, I was like, okay, I'm not actually good enough to do the thing that I want to do. Nobody is their first novel. Come on.
Right. But at the time it was, yeah. It sort of knocked me on my butt. And it took me a while to sort of dig myself out of that hole and to sort of figure out what was coming next. And so for Khan, I feel that was this a very human thing. You sort of go through she has this setback. Obviously she loses her, not her family, but the family she's chosen, and the love of her life. And she was was about to record their first album, was about to have everything that they had all dreamed of, and it's all taken away in this instant. And she's young at the time of the accident. She's 21 years old, and when we meet her, she just doesn't know how to get out of that hole. She doesn't know what to do next. And so after she's cloned and discovers that the person that she has gone on to have been did figure her way out of it. And so there's this like, well, wait, how did I do that? How did I find my way out of it? So it was this very, sort of get to see what your life would have been, although she can't go back and have that life now. Like that, and that was the other thing, was that, she meets some people that she has met in this missing 18 months, but she doesn't have the same relationship with them that she had, because they met at different moments in their lives and they're going through different things. So the same connections don't form. and so she basically has to sort of look at her own life from the outside and can't, and so doing find her own. It was like, well, here's one possible path. I have to find another path because I can't have that one.
So that's interesting, because you just had, Khan did it in real life. She sees this future self or this alternate self who can get out of it. One of the tricks that I use in my life is, well, okay, you're going through something, but imagine when you're through it. So kind of using that as a trick of the imagination. I don't know exactly what I'm saying there, but it's pretty cool that you use that as a technique to help her, when it's also a psychological technique we can kind of use to help ourselves get to that.
I think what you're talking about is a sort of like visualization or positive visualization. Is like, where do you want to be? Where do you see yourself? And sort of using that as a sort of a guided meditation to sort of find that. So she doesn't have to imagine it. She gets to go and actually investigate and say, well, what was this alternate life?
Right.
And how did I find my way out of this hole?
Yeah,
and can I find myself out of it twice?
Yeah. Did you do that? You must have done something with your writer self. You didn't totally give up.
No, I mean, it wasn't the same for me. I quit writing. I quit writing for a long time. I didn't write a word for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years. And in the interim, I became a high school English teacher, among other things. And I was teaching 12th grade English to high school seniors. And there was something in the process of just talking about great books with kids every day, investigating them, thinking about them, reading them over and over and over again. You wind up, I read, there are certain books that I taught for multiple years that I wound up reading 30 or 40 times.
You can't just go by that. Tell us the couple of books 30, 40 times.
Well, Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, I read 30 or 40 times. James Baldwin's Notes of a Native Son, which is, for me, one of the 3 or 4 most important books of the 20th century for Americans.
All right, hold on. I'm serious. Pause. What's the James Baldwin?
Notes of a Native Son. It's nonfiction. It's a collection of his essays from 1954 was when it was published. And it's all of his early thinkings on race in America, and his place in it. And it's a masterpiece. It is absolutely essential reading. It is still as relevant. It's interesting. James Baldwin went after his death in the early 80s. By the time he died in the 80s, he'd sort of fallen out of favor. He'd been very, very sort of, incredibly important and central to the American conversation in the 50s and the 60s. And as he got a little bit older and as the next generation of civil rights activists came in, they started to see him as a little bit of a sellout and a little bit soft and not like aggressive enough in his position. And by the time he died, James Baldwin had a little bit lost his place in the American conversation. But in the last 10 or 15 years, there's sort of been a Baldwin renaissance, and he's just spectacular. He's just the most beautiful writer.
Well, I'm digressing even more here. That's what the producer and director of Two Distant Strangers used, that won the Oscar for a short, talks about the influence of that book. So
tremendous. That, and then I would also recommend The Fire Next Time, which is another. If you're going to read just 2 of Baldwin's nonfiction works, those would be the 2 I would suggest. They're just incredible. The Fire Next Time is basically a letter to his nephew, and also a warning. And it was viewed as very prescient because he basically said, "Is we're asking nicely." He basically quotes a spiritual. It says, God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water, the fire next time. And shortly after that, you had the Watts riots, the Detroit riots, the DC riots. There was a lot of the riots and fires, and he was basically elevated to this. you had predicted this. And he said, no, I didn't predict anything. I was just,
Reading.
like that there's only so long people are going to ask nicely for what they should have.
Okay, I gotta pause this and
Sorry.
read those. No, that's good. I'm glad. I know we have limited time. I want to read those, and maybe I can invite you again, and we'll talk about why those are so important now.
I would love that. Absolutely.
I would really enjoy it, but I read every single book. I do an interview with, I review. I only ask for interviews with ones that I think are fantastic. So I think that'll be a lot of fun. Fun and meaningful and some stuff to chew on. We're gonna do that. So I'm understanding now. I'm understanding why Khan has so much depth to me, is because all of these things went into her. So there's a lot there. And
She was definitely a labor of love.
Yeah, you can feel it. You can feel it. I've 3 times now I've gotten chills and goosebumpies and emotional. Everything you've talked about, very emotional. So honestly, everyone out there, I am not getting paid to do this. This book is so special. So it is. So one of the other things that's a neat thing to always ask, since we're dealing with clones and the future, not that distant future, what is kind of real? What did you totally make up?
So when I came up with the idea for cloning, the first question I had was, when is this going to be set? Is this an alternate history where we have cloning in 2020? Is it am I going to set it in 2120, 100 years from now? And I didn't want to do that because I'm not smart enough to predict what's going to be happening in 100 years. So I settled on, I wanted it to be near future. I wanted it to be an America and a world that felt familiar with, that's a neat thing about speculative fiction, is, a book like Handmaid's Tale, where it feels,
Awful.
right, because you see the plausibility of it. It's not so far away where you're like, well, it's Star Wars. It's in another galaxy far, far away. It's like, no, exactly. It's right here just a few years from now. It's different, but the same. Is a really powerful writing device. So the first question was like, all right, well, it's going to be in 2040. What's real and what's not? The first thing, I did a lot of research into the legality of cloning. What are the laws governing it? Because that obviously played into the book a lot. And the thing I learned was that what I say in the book is true, is there are no federal laws against human cloning. We do human cloning in this country every single day. It's called stem cell research. We clone human cells routinely. So laws governing cloning are states' issues. Like, there are states that outlaw that entirely. There are states that allow it. What we don't do, obviously, is make another Matthew or make another Amy. Like, that's the ethical line that does not get crossed. Now, we will clone Barbara Streisand's dogs. We will clone people's pets. We will clone Dolly the sheep. We will, we have the ability to clone a person right now. If we felt like it could be done. We just, to my knowledge, no one has crossed that ethical divide. The big piece that's more speculative is the consciousness mapping and uploading of a conscious. That is something that they are working on right now. They're deep into like mapping the human brain, and I mean, I'm pushing it with the book to say that in 20 years, sort of consciousness uploading is going to be possible. But I do think that it's something that 60 years down the road, 40, 50, 60 years down the road, that is probably going to be something that is possible. That is something that is being investigated, and then, I mean, so that those are the two big pieces. Is, can you clone a human? Yes. Can you upload a consciousness? No, not yet. Could you merge those two things? Could you be sophisticated enough to upload that consciousness and then put it into another brain? That's above my pay grade. That's where I took the my science fiction jump and said, yes, we will be able to do that. But honestly, there's a lot that would have to be discovered, developed, and learned, and before we would get anywhere close to that.
Yeah, crazy, right? So just like, real life stuff, there are forces with, what are they called? Children of Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Forces within this near future world who are super against cloning. And, it raises the question, like, why do we always have groups of people whose strongest convictions are against what other people are doing? And like, that's their whole thing, is to stop other people from doing stuff. Like, they don't have a for, they just have an against.
I think that, you've hit a really central and complex question of, what it is, how we function as a society and as we function as groups of people. I think that, change is scary, and change that undermine, it's on the instance of cloning, the ability to do that, the ability for someone to die and to be cloned into another body and continue, that undermines thousands of years of assumption about what a human is, right? Because once you get into the idea of soul and souls and of afterlives and of this, that, and the other, you're messing with a very fundamental bedrock understanding of what a human being is. And that is going to be terrifying to some people and unacceptable and meddling, and you're doing something that's not meant to be, you've seen it over the last 100 years as new scientific. I remember when in vitro fertilization came along in the early 80s, the late 70s, early 1980s, when I was a kid, you had your first test tube baby, which is what it got called. Now that has since become in vitro fertilization, and couples and women have been using in vitro fertilization, have used it millions of times in this country. But when it first happened, there was a huge ethical panic about it. They were test tube babies. That's not a real child. There was a lot of really nasty and very knee-jerk reaction to it, because again, that's not how it had worked for thousands of years. You are meddling with our comfort level of what.
It's comfort. Yeah, it is comfort. I gotta think there's some strain of feeling powerless in there, though. I think that when I never have any of those feelings. I don't. I'm like, well, I'm just gonna. But I also have a lot of constructive projects. I'm a creative person. I have a lot of stuff I like to do. I have a lot of positive things I'm focused on. I just don't even have time to even know or care what anybody else is doing.
Right.
So I wonder if it's just the idea of change. When you see change as something almost positive in terms of creation, you embrace it. You're a writer. That's a form of it's a form of something new. You're making new things. This whole world. Khan is a person. She's in a book, but she's a person. She feels real. That's what makes Constance so terrific. So I wonder if it's if you don't have those kind of things, maybe there's something there, and not that we're going to figure out now, but I wonder if it's connected to an idea of helplessness or powerlessness over change.
Yeah, and that is an interest. That's a theme that's always interested me, is that, I think about my grandmother a lot. She was born in 1921. And in 1935, the United States passed the Rural Electrification Act, because at that time, only 2% of American farms had electricity. In 1935, 13 years after she was born. Between the time that she was born and the time she died in 1999, she saw the rise of the automobile, the airplane, the atomic bomb, electricity, indoor plumbing, widespread, the dishwasher, I can't even fathom how much, the assumptions of what her life was going to look like in 1921, versus where she ended up. I mean, at the end of the life, she was alive in time to see the internet, the cell phone, the home computer. It just must have been a mind-blowing journey of such radical change. And she didn't get a say in any of it. That all of those changes were delivered, and then you just had no choice but to adapt to them. I don't think many people asked for the atomic bomb. It was invented. A small group of people decided this is something that we should invent. And now we all live with that. Technology has changed fundamentally our assumptions about, when I grew up, like, it was right at the end of the Cold War, and there was a sense that, okay, our lives could realistically end, at the push of a button, all of our lives. And no one asked, for that technology, for that change. So some changes are incredibly positive, but some technological changes, and I don't know that there's always forethought into, like, we're going to drop this new technology in.
Who was it who said we were so interested in figuring out if we could, we didn't ask if we should?
A lot of people have said that. I mean, the popular iteration.
It was one of the scientists on the project.
Yeah, I mean, and it's been reused a million times. I mean, Jeff Goldblum says it in Jurassic Park, because Michael Crichton was a big fan of writing books about technology run amok. And Jurassic Park is, I think Jeff Goldblum's character says it word for word. He's just like, you're so excited about doing this, you didn't stop to ask if you should. Yeah. And right now we've got a technology. Are you familiar with deep fakes?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
you have that in the book.
Yeah.
You have somebody's deep faked. Yeah. That's towards the end. We're not going to talk about that, but. Yeah.
But like, that's a fascinating example of who thinks this is a good idea. You're going to be able to take any politician, any person, and have them say anything you want and put it on the internet, and no one will be able to tell whether that person is real or not. So our ability to trust and believe anything that we see on the news, which is already low,
you think,
is going to be wiped away entirely.
Well, you got to do what we had to do when you're writing a research paper. You have to have multiple sources. You have to have primary materials.
Right, but the ability to very quickly, but people believe the first thing they see. Particularly on the.
Do that. I'm just saying.
Oh no, we shouldn't. But
well, but so that. That's. No.
But that to me, that's just a fascinating example of a technology of a group of people who aren't really stopping to ask if they should. They're only interested in, can they?
Right.
And it will be up to us to live in a world where
figure it out as we go along. Or so much science fiction is we destroy everything and then we have to go live someplace else, and maybe we do it there too.
Right. And start all over again.
Yeah. So there's a reason why that's a popular story. So we're gonna. Do you have a few more minutes? Are you
Absolutely.
On? Okay.
No, I'm good.
So Constance is out. All right, we love it. Buy it. Now, gonna switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about my new writers out there. What do you have to tell them? How can they understand, their first novel is probably going to suck, and how do they keep on going? What advice do you have for them?
So don't live in a vacuum, share your work, and be prepared to listen to what people tell you. when I was writing that first novel in my 20s, I broke all of those rules. I very rarely showed it to anyone. And when I did, I wasn't prepared to listen to the feedback. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't resilient enough to hear feedback without hearing it just as criticism or just as, you don't believe in me. It was a very childish approach. You have to be able to listen. Not necessarily, but also be, listen to what people tell you, but also be willing to put it aside if you're like, no, I want to stick to my guns. But I found it incredibly helpful to just hear and just to listen to people I trust. Find that small group of people who have your back and will tell you the truth. When I wrote my second book, when I wrote Short Drop, I was about halfway through. I was writing it just for myself, and I was like, wait, I think this actually might be good this time. So I showed it to a small group of people, and with a very simple question, because it wasn't finished at the time. I was about halfway through. I said, would you finish this if you bought this in a bookstore and read it? And I knew that they wouldn't lie to me, and they all said, yeah, I want to know how this finishes. So it sort of gave me that boost to go back and put my head down and get it finished. So that is a big piece, is have a community around you that, that you trust and whose advice you respect and who will not just tell you what you want to hear. And be willing to not hear what you want to hear. There may be something really useful in that. And then my other piece of advice is a piece of advice that I learned from teaching high school, which is one of the general piece of advice is you got to read. You got to be reading all the time. Read a variety of stuff, different authors. All true. Definitely do that. The thing that I learned from reading Toni Morrison 50 times was that an author will take several years to write a book. Toni Morrison only, was writing for 40 years and only wrote X number of books. She took years writing a book. We buy that book and we read it in however fast you read, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever your time frame. And then we say, I've read this Toni Morrison book and I'm done with it. And we never look at it again. And we move on to the next book. But you didn't get it. There's absolutely no way you got what Toni Morrison was doing there. She spent 6 years crafting that in ways that, or whatever number of years it is, you didn't get it in 2 weeks. So if you read something that really, really speaks to you, that you got the tingles from, that you got whatever it was, read it again, and then maybe read it again. We listen to our favorite music.
True.
Hundreds of times. We listen to our favorite songs. How many, whatever your favorite song is, you've heard it 1,000 times. Every
sometimes
note of it.
On repeat.
Sometimes on repeat. Sometimes on repeat. So that's to the point where you can sing along. There is something to be said for learning to reading your favorite books often enough that you can sing along with them.
Wow, I like that. So speaking of crafting a book, you talk about, in your author notes at the end of Constance, this book came to you well before, when you were in the middle of other things. So listening to your muse, tell us about how this book happened, but also advice you have for how to distinguish what's that muse speaking to you, and do you always have to listen? Do you have to ignore it? How to listen to the muse?
Well, once there's a, when you write your first book, or when you're writing for purely yourself. When I was writing Short Drop, I was still working as an English teacher, and it took me 2.5 years. I wrote in the summer and on the weekends and on vacations, and no one cared. Which is good, which I didn't mean that in a bad way. Like, no one cared, which means like I was free to do whatever I wanted. It would be done when I said it would be done, and that would be fine. Or it wouldn't, and no one would care because I hadn't told anyone. When I sold Short Drop, and I was fortunate enough to sell it, and I was given a 2-book contract by my first publisher, and I turned it in. They're like, great, we're very excited about this. Now let's talk about the second one. We would like the second one in 11 months on this day, and we'll talk to you then. Bye-bye. And I went, wait, what? And I had quit my day job, and I had to learn how to be a professional. And that there's a huge difference between I'm going to take a couple of years and write a book and it'll be done when I say it is. And Matt, we'd like that book on this date, 11 months from now, go. And it was a real, like, teach myself, like, how to treat it like a job, how to get up, sit down, work, have a schedule. I don't get to have days where I'm like, I'm not feeling it, which I used to do when I was writing my first book. If I didn't feel it, who cared? Is all for me. Now it's just a different animal. It's if I don't
say no, can you say no? You can say, or are they just like, this is their thing? Or
oh no,
how much negotiation do you have?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can say I need more time, but you don't get paid until you turn it in. So if you don't turn it in, you didn't get paid that year. You get, the way a book contract works is you get, let's say your book contract is $100. You get $50 for signing the contract. And then you get the remaining $50 for the delivery of however many books are on that contract. So if it's 2 books, the first book comes in, you get another $25. You turn the next book in, you get the last $25. So that advance, you don't get it all, you don't get the whole advance up front. It's paid out for the delivery of your next book. So if you're not on schedule, they'll be like, okay, but you didn't get paid. So you're gonna have to figure out how to pay your rent or your mortgage or whatever some other way. So I mean, if you get to a certain level and you're getting paid, you're that incredibly small, rarefied group of authors who are getting, 7-figure advances. I mean, but that's an unbelievably tiny sliver. Then you can take a couple of years and write, or you have a lot of. I mean, it's unbelievable the number of writers who are published, successful names who still teach or still have side hustles, or they still, they have multiple things going on, because, making a living as a working author is not easy. I mean, that was the big thing that I discovered. It was like how challenging it is to keep. So that book a year, I mean, a lot of particularly genre writers, mystery thriller writers, you're sort of on a book a year cadence. You're like, let's get the next one out. So there's a tough, like, it's like art and commerce. It's like, I need to make a living, but I also want my book to be really good. And so at some point, those two things are going to, come into conflict with each other. That you can't always have it. Sometimes the book is not going to be quite where you want it to be, but if you don't turn it in.
So what does your team look like? What does the editing process look like? How different was what you turned in for Constance to what I read? How much better does it get at that point?
It gets significantly better. I mean, I go through sort of self-editing process. I have that group of people whom I trust. So I get to a place, I think a lot of authors refer to as beta readers, sort of just friends, smart people I know, readers who, will read my book, my drafts, and like give me feedback.
They're gold. I mean,
absolute
readers are gold.
And a big thing on beta readers is it's a two-way street, right? It's a relationship, because beta readers initially are afraid to tell you the truth because they don't know yet whether you're going to be a baby about
Doesn't everyone
it.
start off a baby though? I mean,
isn't
that a process too? Like you gradually are like, okay, like they were right about that, and 3 people said that, and like, fine, I'll let go of it. Like, I don't think you can do it right at the beginning. I think it's gradual.
it is a process, but my advice, strong advice, is get good at it fast. Because if you're a baby, you will ruin your beta reader forever. They will never trust you that they can tell you what they think. They'll just be like, this is great. It was great. They'll just stay. It'll be incredibly surface. It will not be helpful. It won't even necessarily be true, because if you slap them, not physically, but like if you slap them, if you clap back because your feelers got hurt, they're just never going to come back. So you get one shot at that. So they have to trust you as much as you trust them.
Yep.
Once you have that, they're invaluable. They're just gold, because so I go through that process with my people. Then I turn it in. Your editor will sort of write a developmental memo.
Tell us what that is, just for people who don't know.
So with my publisher, I'm assigned an editor at the publisher who reads it and accepts it and says, yes, we'll now move to the next phase. I've so far, knock on wood, not had this happen, but they will sometimes go like, no, this is not, go back, this and this need to be addressed. Go back and come back when you have these things sorted out. But if they're like, yes, okay, we're ready, it'll go into sort of what would be called a developmental editing phase, where you are assigned to and work with an editor who will read your book and just give you like weeks worth of work to do on like, we need to tighten this up. We need to lose this, and this. We really need a scene here that's missing. What if we move this? It's that kind of like, it's pretty daunting when you get that back the first time and you sort of open it up, and it'll come with a memo. It'll come with a memo that'll be like a sort of a written, like, this is what I'm seeing. And then you'll also have sort of an inline edit within like the whip itself. And then you basically, you knuckle down and you start to make all those changes, and you think it through.
You can do because you have done. I'm imagining that's the most daunting the first time around, when you think like, oh, they took my book and now you have all this stuff to do.
Right. And you do, and generally, if you have a good developmental editor, they are right, because they are dispassionate. They haven't been looking, by the time you turn it in, I think I don't know if all authors, but many authors that I've spoken to, you have an idea, you love the idea, you get to work on it, you're trucking along through your book, and then you get to a point and you're like, this sucks.
Yeah,
I hate this. Always. I wish I never started this. This is the worst thing I've ever done. And it's like you're going through a breakup. You break up and you don't talk to your book for a couple of weeks, and they go away and they see other books, and you pout, and then you get back together and you're like, okay, I overreacted. And then you sort of you give the relationship another chance. But by the time you get to the developmental editor, you've lost perspective on it. You don't see it, as clearly as you did. You're too up in it. And the great thing about having an editor come in is they haven't been writing it for 2 years or a year, whatever your time frame was, and they are the cold, hard light of day. And they're like, these are the great things about your book, and these are the things that need to get done. And you're like, oh, why didn't I see that? Why didn't I understand that? Because you couldn't, because you can't there's a point in the writing process where it's difficult to step back and see the forest for the trees, or the words for the sentences, or whatever your mixed metaphor wants to be. And they're invaluable. They make a world of difference.
It sounds incredible to me. I mean, it sounds like it's just a way to make something better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For sure. Wouldn't do it any other way.
Yeah. My daughter's in film, and one of the things they teach she was in film, she was a screenwriting major. One of the things they teach, because this is in college, so the kids are, somebody gives a note and the kids immediately respond to the note. No, that's not this because blah, 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 blah. And what the teachers teach them to do, take out a piece of paper, write down the notes you're given, don't respond, don't have an emotional reaction, look at them later, out of the situation. So I think that's maybe that's a way to speed up that process of like, okay, when you get your notes back, just say, all right, I'm not gonna respond to them emotionally. I'm gonna give it just let it rest a second instead of immediately fight back.
Right. If your basic attitude is I'm a genius and all you're here to do is to tell me how great I am, you're not going to get very far. You got to acknowledge that you can be both a genius and have things to learn.
And isn't it skill too? That it's perspective and skill.
I was a terrible writer when I was in college. I was an atrocious writer. I don't even want to think. I taught myself to write. I was incredibly lazy. I hadn't given it a lot of thought in high school and college. I could write, but I wouldn't want to go back and look at any of the papers I wrote in school. I mean, I have a feeling they would be very damning as a whole. And I had a moment in one of my first jobs out of college where my boss was had been a former editor of the obituary section of the New York Times, and he had me write something for him. And then he was
an obituary?
No. He had been, and now he had me write. He basically had me write an investor letter.
Oh.
And I went away and I wrote it and I brought it back to him. I was 22 or 23, and about 45 minutes later, he just started screaming my name. And I went into his office and he was like, "Did you write?" And he held up the letter I'd written, and it was just nothing but red all over. And he was like, "Did you write this?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, you wrote this. You wrote this. You wrote this. I was like, "Yeah, what?" He's like, "This is trash."
Oh boy.
He's like, "You graduated from college? It said on your resume that you graduated from college. You're telling me you graduated from college and you wrote this." I will never forget that moment. It was like my neck was, you know how your neck gets hot when you're embarrassed?
Yes.
And he was like, "This is just."
How does that it differently?
Oh no, not this guy. This guy was, he was kind of a legend. But
legendary asshole.
As just a gruff. I mean, he looked like a 1920s fireman. He was just like this stocky dude and like bald with the mustache, and he was like FitzSimmons. I mean, it was very old school. Anyway, it was one of the more important moments of my life, because I left that off and was like, okay, I clearly did not pay attention in school. And I sat down and I taught myself to write. I bought books on writing, I clearly did not absorb the lessons I needed to learn. It was my first encounter with the cold light of day. It was like, if you want to be a writer, you need to know how to write. And I did not. I did not know grammar. I could not spell particularly well. I was a wreck. So I learned. I taught myself. I was like, all right, I'm going to fill this hole in my education.
Yeah, there's a lot of tools for that now too. That can.
Yep, a ton.
Helpfully, even something like Grammarly, it shows you what you did wrong and what the rule is, so that I think I finally understand how to use commas now. But I was never taught that. I mean, to
right.
my own behalf, I didn't know. I thought it was just like when you pause in a sentence. I didn't know there was actual kind of rules about it. Anyway,
I was taught. I was just too busy being like an angry teenager to actually pay. It's like, I don't need to know that. I'm too busy being angry and mysterious over here in the corner to pay attention to your comma lesson. And then, eight years later, there's a guy yelling at you in his office and not believing you graduated from college.
Don't you think it's because they tell you what the lessons are? You're like, okay, what are the things you like to do? Okay, well, here are the things that correspond to things you like to do. That's a whole nother discussion. School. Anyway, what's next for you, Matthew FitzSimmons?
I am, to my surprise, writing a second book in the world of Constance. It was not my intention when I started it. It was going to be just a single book. It takes place 2 years after the events of Constance. And the main character is not Constance. It's a story about another clone. Constance is in the book. Many of the characters from the first book make an appearance, but I realized that I wanted to look at some of the issues that the world allowed me to look at, but from a different perspective, a different vantage point.
I can see that. Yeah.
And so I'm really excited about it. I didn't think I wanted to do another one of these. I didn't have one in my mind. And then so one day in February, I took a shower, and by the time I got out of the shower, I called my editor. I was like, I've got another book.
Nice.
And they're like,
will someone pitch this for you to Hollywood? Because it could be you could write a pilot for this.
We are, it is,
I'd love to watch it. It's, and she's great. And, having a great character is essential.
We're keeping our fingers crossed. Hopefully the book will generate some interest, but you got to sort of get it out there and see what happens. I mean, Hollywood is such a fickle town.
It is, but it's kind of like, did you watch Altered Carbon?
I did not.
Altered Carbon is like the super accelerated version of this. It's well done. I've heard that it's based on books, and the opinion is if you love the show, the books are so different, you're not gonna like the book. So I haven't decided what to do there, because I do love the show. So
when I came up with the idea, when you come up with an idea for a book like this, it's sort of like a high concept-y book, I went to the computer and I was like, books about cloning.
Yeah.
And Altered Carbon was like the first one that came up. So I've never read Altered Carbon or seen Altered Carbon. I was like, okay, I don't want.
Oh, you can now. It's so different than what you're doing. There's,
and I might at some, because it's set 500 years in the future.
It's super in the future. Obviously some of the things are parallels, because they're always going to be the whole side of it, and the fact that money is still just as important as it always is, stuff like that. So.
Oh, interesting. I mean, I think at some point I will go and read it just out of curiosity, but I just sort of like, okay, I know it's there, and I know it. I read just enough to be like, okay, my idea is different, and then I was like, I don't want to know. Because other people brought Altered Carbon up to me. I was like, no.
I'm just saying for Hollywood, that's
yeah. Oh no, for sure.
There's already a lot of people interested in that idea, and because it's similar but different enough, there's not a lot of really good near future stuff, and people just love it. So hey, I'd pitch for you if I had it in. Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
Great conversation. I have some reading to do of
let me know what you think.
Toni Morrison, and we will talk again, hopefully.
I would love that. I would really love that.
All right. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed this conversation so much. I'm, philosophical, thinky person, so this was perfect for me. Constance, Matthew FitzSimmons. Good luck with it. Good luck with everything. I loved it. I hope a lot of people read it. Not from a marketing or selling, and that's all great, but just because they're going to really enjoy it, and it's really good. So.
Thank you, man. I really hope so. It was really a pleasure to talk to you.
I read a lot. It's excellent. And she's going to become Con is going to become a fan favorite.
I like it. All right. You've got a job, but if you ever go into the PR end of things,
no kidding. Well, I'm incredibly enthusiastic about stuff I like. So.
Thank you so much.
All right, Matthew. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Have a great day.